O'Reilly.
You've got questions? O'Reilly Auto Parts has answers. Need a pro you can trust? We've got that too. No matter what you need, our professional parts people have the training and expertise to help you do things right. Deep automotive knowledge, just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Hi everyone, I'm Deb Flashenberg. Welcome to Yoga, Birth, Babies, a podcast produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. We will be diving into everything prenatal yoga, birth, and baby related, hoping to inspire, educate, and empower you through your journey into motherhood. Thank you for listening. Hi, I'm Deb Flashenberg. I am your host of Yoga Birth Babies, and today we have a really interesting and quite lively conversation about toxins in commercial baby food and babies' first foods. And you might be thinking, how is it lively? It's a conversation about toxins in commercial baby food. Well, I have the joy of speaking to a very old friend of mine from more than, I think it was about 25 years ago. So Malina Linkas Malkani is a registered dietitian, nutritionist, author, single mom of 3, and trusted nutrition expert in local and national media outlets and publications. Malina is the author of the book Simple and Safe Baby-Led Weaning: How to Integrate Foods, Manage Portion Size, and Identify Allergies, and the creator of an online course for parents called Solve Picky Eating. So Malina dives into this conversation, and this is based on data that came out in February of 2021. And she really lays out the information and honestly takes some of the worry aside, because if you just saw the data, you might, or just even saw the topic of it, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to feed my baby? But Malina takes us through this whole conversation and takes some of the concern out, and also offers some alternatives and ways to limit the exposure of these heavy metals that are found in commercial baby foods. So I think you're going to enjoy that. Also, if you stay till the very end, you can hear our conversation, oh my goodness, of back when we were roommates. I believe I was 20, she was 19. I just tell the story that still makes me smile and giggle. So stay till the end for that. It just, even thinking about it, oh, it was so silly. We were so silly. All right, so before we get to that, just a reminder that our classes are continuing online, but that we have really big news that we're officially pulling ourselves back into the studio, our official grand opening. So we're slowly starting the process, and we're starting with just a couple classes, but I'm going to be back in the studio in July teaching some of my morning classes. I'll be teaching it live to the students there, and I'll also be teaching it hybrid because we've created such a beautiful community beyond our walls of New York, and I want to keep that thriving. So check out our website for all of this information of when you can come take class. And if you happen to know a pregnant person or a new parent, please share this information. Help us rebuild, reopen, re-strengthen. Now, if you're thinking, what do I do between classes? I can't necessarily get into the class, or my body's hurting because I'm pregnant or just had a baby. I've got you covered. I have a free downloadable called 5 Simple Solutions to the Most Common Pregnancy Pains. Now, this can also be perfect for postpartum pains. If you go to the website, prenatalyogacenter.com, you can find that free downloadable. And then it's like your little cheat sheet between classes so that your body still feels really good. No reason to suffer. I got you covered there. We've also been having people say, well, what are you going to do about your 85-hour teacher training? So we ran everything online recently. And as of now, we're going to end 2021 with our online teacher training. It is 2 intensive weekends, and that usually requires people traveling to New York, or Caprice and I, my co-teacher trainee, travel elsewhere. And that can be expensive for everyone. So we are continuing for the rest of 2021 to offer 2 online teacher trainings. So if you're thinking you want to take it, but you don't want to have to accrue the expenses, check out what we have going on, prenatalyogacenter.com. Go to the teacher training page, see if the dates work for you. And then we're going to be back in person in January, February. We'll be at Willow Street Yoga in Washington, D.C. And then for the spring, dates are not quite figured out. We're going to be back in New York City. I am so excited to do some in-person teacher training. So I hope to work with those that are interested in supporting the perinatal community. It is truly a blessing to watch and walk along with people as they enter parenthood. Okay, we're going to take a super quick break, and when we come back, please enjoy my conversation with Malina. Hi, Malina. How are you?
Hello. I'm so happy to be here with you.
I have like a grin from ear to ear. So, okay, I'm all about transparency. So listener friends, Malina and I go way, way back. I mean, like a couple of decades.
Further back than you would like to say.
It's funny that we're now both in this world of supporting pregnant and expectant people and new parents, because we started our friendship. I won't even say the year because I don't think I even know it, but we were in our maybe early 20s, 2021, something.
I think I was 18.
You were 18? I think I was 20.
20, maybe 19. It was so far back now that it is hard to remember. My God.
I feel like I go by, was I able to legally drink? And I feel like I was not.
Yeah.
So
no,
I must have been 20, and we were roommates doing summer stock up in New Hampshire.
And babies were the furthest thing from our minds. I mean,
oh my gosh. And I just remember you had this like moisturizing routine, and you're like, don't you? And I thought, no. And so I dedicate my skincare to you.
Oh, you're making me laugh.
Oh my gosh, I have like tears in my eyes. This is so great. All right. So anyway, we're going to get on topic, but I'm just so happy to reconnect. And we got to reconnect when you were pregnant too. So that was super fun.
Yes, we were talking about that. We were talking about how, because when I lived in the city, I got pregnant with my first, and I found your studio and was so excited to see you. It had been years, and walked in, and I was telling you, I think it was on our IG Live, how those yoga classes that you taught were some of my favorite memories of both being pregnant and then also after having had the baby and coming for your postpartum yoga classes with my baby. Those were some of the sweetest moments that I had as a mom. Just moving my body and taking care of myself a little bit, and trying to sort of acclimate to the world of being a first time parent, and you sort of, in such a gentle and beautiful way, help mothers transition through that period. And
thank you. It is truly a joy and an honor and a deep pleasure. I love what I do. So I'm just glad that we continue to support one another. Our audiences are perfect, and we have different things we bring to the table. So I'm so excited to see different ways we can work together. But today's topic, it's so interesting. As I was thinking, like, what should we talk about? Toxins in baby food.
I know. Yeah, but so many things we could talk about. But you know what? I'm really glad that you brought it up, because this topic, it has come up a lot in the past several months, because there was a report that was really a congressional report that came out. And when it did, I got so many really concerned and scared messages from parents and caregivers saying, like, what is going on with the baby food?
It was really, when I was researching this and took a look at the information, I was quite surprised and really glad that we are going to have a chance to dive in. So I'm really going to hand a lot over it to you. So we'll talk about toxins in baby food and also baby's first foods, because even though my kids are not super old, I feel like the approach to feeding kids has changed. And my daughter's she just turned 7. It's not that long ago. So yeah. I'm excited to dive into all this, because baby food and baby's first foods go quite well. So, all right, I know about you. I've known about you for a long time. So let's have other people learn a little bit about you. And then how did things transition from the stage to becoming a dietitian?
That's so, and I would love to ask you the same thing. Going from this stage into yoga and your doula work. But yes, so yes, I started in performing, which was how I met the wonderful Deb. I was basically based in New York. I was in the performing world and did a lot of singing, acting, dancing, and traveled the country on national tours, appeared in regional theater, some off Broadway. And in that industry, I loved it. It was a great career. But, as I'm sure there was so much pressure at that time in the industry to look a certain way and to be, to sort of be slender. And I really learned the hard way that dieting and food restriction was not the answer to that sort of issue. And as you know, too, since we did so many shows together, getting through 8 shows a week requires an enormous amount of energy. And I started sort of learning about nutrition as a way to fuel myself because it was such a difficult it was something that I was really struggling with as I was feeling pressure from that industry, also knowing that I needed to have energy. I started looking into nutrition. Did you have some sort of a path that was similar?
My path came from, I was performing, I was doing a national tour, and everyone kept saying, you have to meet this woman, Donna. And I'm like, who's this Donna person? And she was a dancer, she was a ballerina, and she went from performing to yoga, and our paths kept crossing that people I knew her. And then it started to get to the point where in my mind, I'm like, I really should go take this ballet class, but I'd rather take a yoga class. And then I was actually up for a national tour, and I'm like, if I get that tour, I'm going to have to give up my yoga. And so it just started drawing me away from the stage that I loved performing. I still love it, but it wasn't something something else, like the love of yoga and teaching grew stronger.
Yes, I can really relate to that. I can absolutely relate to that because as I studied nutrition more and more, I sort of fell in love with the science of it and the way that proper nourishment made me feel. And I started feeling like there's a helping element to this profession that I love performing. I will always love performing, but I wanted my life's work to take on a little bit more of a tangible, helping people in a one-on-one and also group way that nutrition filled for me in a way that performing didn't. And I still love it. I'm so passionate about nutrition and I always will be passionate about performing too. But it felt like the right natural path for me at the time.
And it's hugely successful. And let's face it, it's a little bit more steady and long-lived for most of us, the dietitian and the work you do, because one can only perform for so long for the most part.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to jump in to toxic metals in commercial baby food. I'm like, what? All right. So I'm just going to hand it over to you. How is this even possible?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a really important question. And there was a lot of concern, like I said, that was born around the time that the Congressional Report was released in February, but it wasn't actually new news. These sort of reports sort of circulate every few years. And in 2019, there was a study by the Healthy Babies Bright Futures that found that about 95% of the baby foods that they tested in that report contained heavy metals. And so there was a big hoopla then as well. And it's really concerning, especially for first-time parents, but for parents in general. And I'm a single mom of 3 girls. My girls were all born within about 3.5 years of each other. And so, I've been in the weeds of feeding multiple babies all at once and trying to sort of juggle all of the things that go along with that. And so as a dietitian working in the pediatric and maternal space, what I try to do with my work is reduce as much of that stress or the parental and caregiver stress around food and feeding as I possibly can. And so it was really hard when this report came out because I found that the news stories about the Congressional Report were a little bit misleading. And that's because the issue of toxic metals in baby food is they made it sound like it was unique to baby food, but it's not. Heavy metals are ubiquitous in the food supply because they exist in tiny amounts in the soil. They can also be found in water. And this is certainly alarming. It's not something that we should dismiss. But, again, the problem isn't necessarily with baby food. It's with the ingredients that are used to make it. And that's regardless of whether they're grown organically or grown conventionally.
Oh, that's going to be interesting because I can imagine people thinking, well, I'm buying organic or I'm making it organic. I should be in the clear, but you're saying no.
Right, exactly. That is because these heavy metals exist in the soil. And so any food that's grown in the soil, whether it's organically grown or conventionally grown, is subject to that. And that's because, it's a result of the former use of pesticides and herbicides that they remain in the soil and they persist. Even in those organically grown foods. And then also processing, manufacturing, and fortification with vitamins and minerals. This sort of adds more heavy metals into the foods as well. So we have an issue that's just coming from the result of having used these fertilizers and some of the past agricultural practices.
Are there certain foods that actually contain higher amounts of toxic metals than others? Because I remember seeing some sort of list of like the top 10 that you should always get organic. And I'm wondering if there's something similar in this.
Well, the funny thing is that many of the common ingredients that are used to make baby food tend to have comparatively higher levels of the heavy metals in question. And these are foods like rice and carrots and sweet potatoes, and foods that when we think of baby food, you often find them in those commercially prepared baby foods. And this does not mean that these foods are quote unquote bad. I get really frustrated when people sort of assign a binary good or bad to these different foods. It really just at the end of the day means that we understand now more than ever in light of this report, how important it is to offer these foods and all foods in the context of a widely varied diet, rather than offering sweet potatoes every day or multiple times throughout the day, or, same thing with rice or carrots. That diet diversity and that variety is so important for many reasons. And not just so that we can sort of reduce the potential for any one specific contaminant. It's also, on the flip side, so that we can guarantee that babies and kids and people in general are getting a wide spectrum of nutrients from all the food groups as well. So that diet diversity is really important.
That makes a lot of sense. And as you're saying the same foods, is this really this is across the board, whether it's baby food or adults eating, just to have a varied diet?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That I feel like as dietitians, we're kind of pounding the table all the time about the importance of a varied diet. And I start to sound like a broken record sometimes, but it is important from so many different angles. We look at it from so many different angles, and it's important for so many reasons.
All of a sudden, I'm feeling very guilty. My son's vegetable every day for lunch and dinner. Each kid has to have a vegetable before they can have their treat. And my daughter's go-to is peppers or carrot. The peppers or cucumbers. My son pretty much is carrots. And I'm like, okay, note to self, try to change that up.
Well, and if the child is eating a vegetable, it is a win. It's a total win. And that's wonderful that you're offering. And working in as much variety as often as you can is good too. But, don't beat yourself up.
Just another thing to add to the list of beating myself up. All right, so what are the health side effects to this exposure?
Well, so before I dive in on that, I just want to say that, when you really dig in on the numbers that are looking at some of the previous studies that were linking these toxic metals, really arsenic, particularly arsenic, and the negative health outcomes in kids, the exposure that we're talking, the level of exposure, that, for example, a baby may have had from commercial baby foods, from the baby foods in question in the report, are unlikely to come close to the level of exposure that was over time linked in previous studies with the negative effects. So I just want to start by saying that because I'm hoping that it will reduce some of the concern from parents about baby food, commercially prepared baby food. The report was definitely concerning, but is it cause for panic when you dig in on those numbers? No. Arsenic exposure has been associated with lower IQ in children in the previous studies, those cognitive and neurological deficits, some behavioral problems. But again, there's ways to look at it and ways to sort of approach it, and some practical ways to reduce a baby and a child's exposure to those contaminants that we need to think about because they are present in the food supply in tiny, tiny amounts.
All right, so let's look at some practical ways to reduce babies' exposure. And I know you mentioned rice, so we can go with that in a moment. But in general, what are some practical ways to reduce babies' exposure to these contaminants that are everywhere in the food supply?
Yeah. Well, number one, like I mentioned before, is to serve a variety of foods. And two reasons for that. Again, you want that wide spectrum of nutrients from the different food groups so that babies can get all the nutrients they need to thrive and grow. We want to reduce the likelihood that they'll take in too much of any one specific contaminant. So the more varied the diet, the less likely that is. In my opinion, there's no need to go throw out all the processed baby food. No need at all, because in the context of a varied diet, it's completely possible to take that food and fold it into a varied diet over time, stretch it out, add it in here and there. But I had a lot of messages from people saying, I'm bagging it all up. I'm tossing it after I was reading this report. And, families are struggling enough to feed their children right now. And at the end of the day, fed is best. And we are doing the best we can to feed our kids with the food that we have access to. And I think it's really important to remember that our collective energy is really much better spent if we're going to focus it anywhere, putting it toward asking for higher standards from the FDA, and better reporting and more transparency around manufacturing practices than it is kind of, writing off all commercial baby food or parent shaming anyone who has fed their children commercial baby foods. It's not helpful.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I can imagine the stress. And I mean, right now there is a lot of stress and strain just to be and always stress and strain to be a parent, but right now it's quite hard. And I can imagine it's not always possible to be like, okay, now what do I do? Especially if you're juggling multiple kids or jobs or whatever it is, to not be able to rely on prepackaged baby food. Not everyone has the time or luxury or money to make it themselves.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And there is enough stress. There's enough stress and strain that we're dealing with as parents and caregivers without taking that on as well.
That's important. Thank you.
Yeah. But let's go back to the rice, because I think there's also ways to kind of, if there was a biggest concern from the report, it did seem to be the presence of arsenic in rice-based foods, whether they're puffs or the iron-fortified infant rice cereal or teething biscuits. And it's funny because these are foods that aren't necessarily the most nutrient-rich to begin with. And so, if for any of your listeners, I'm sure many of them have babies. If they've ever fed a baby, they know it's, a lot of the food ends up on the floor or in the bib or, on the wall.
On their face.
Exactly, as opposed to in the mouth. And so, or in the tummy. So we want to maximize the nutrition in every bite we can, because babies are small and because they're still learning how to eat, and those feeding skills are still developing. So one way to sort of reduce the likelihood of intake of those toxic metals is to reduce limit or avoid those rice-based foods. And there's a lot of practical ways to do that. There's great alternatives to infant rice cereal now. For example, some of the iron-fortified whole grain cereals like baby oatmeal cereal or whole grain cereals that are made with barley or quinoa. There's great puffs on the market that are made with ancient grains like sorghum. You can do freeze-dried fruit snacks instead of those little rice puffs, or just frozen peas if your baby's crawling or using a pincer grasp already, something that's a whole food. So there's something to, at the margins, consider limiting rice and rice-based foods. And then another great way to sort of reduce some of the potential for that toxic metal exposure is to avoid fruit juice before the age of 12 months, and sparingly, if at all, after that. And that's a recommendation that's been around for a long time. And it's not just to reduce the baby's and toddlers' exposure to heavy metals, which the report did find in fruit juice, but for other reasons as well, like protecting their teeth and protecting their appetite for actual food as opposed to beverages, because too much juice can make them feel full and then they don't want to eat. So these are just some practical, and it's funny because these are recommendations that were kind of around before the report. The recommendations haven't really changed too much in response to the report. So that's something.
I'm glad that you highlighted this. Thank you. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about this rice cereal, because I feel like everyone thinks about rice cereal as the baby's first food, and you just gave a whole bunch of great alternatives. So we're going to segue into that. We'll be right back.
O'Reilly.
Check engine light on? Take the guesswork out of your check engine light with O'Reilly Veriscan. It's free and provides a report with solutions based on over 650 million vehicle scans verified by ASE certified master technicians. And if you need help, we can recommend a shop for you. Ask for O'Reilly Veriscan today.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Okay, we are back. So I'm glad you mentioned the rice and the arsenic content. And in general, I feel like, I don't know why, but rice cereal tends to be a lot of people's go-to. And this is a great segue for shifting into baby's first food. Why do we think rice cereal is at the top of a lot of people's mind for baby's first food? And do you have other suggestions for baby's first food?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, this question, I did some digging into the history behind this question when I was writing my book, Simple and Safe Baby-Led Weaning. And it's a really interesting answer, actually. Back at toward the turn of the century, the early 1900s, doctors were recommending that women breastfeed on a strict schedule. And they didn't understand at that point that when they weren't breastfeeding on demand, milk supply went down. And so the babies were hungry, and they were kind of looking for ways to fill that hunger, but they were young. They were, only 3 months old, and finger foods were not, they were not developmentally able to eat them at that point. So rice cereal sort of came on the scene as a way that babies could be filled up without breast milk, it was a food that developmentally worked at that time. And they thought that it was well tolerated and that, because it was bland, it was an appropriate baby food. But the funny thing about rice cereal is that it's not that well digested for babies under the age of 6 months. And we know now that the more flavor and texture we can offer to babies starting at about 6 months of age when they're showing the signs of readiness for solid foods, the less likely we're going to have things like food fussiness down the road, and the more adventurous the palate is going to be. So rice cereal, it's not the best first food for a bunch of different reasons that don't even include the potential for the arsenic that is present.
It's so funny that just kind of lingers in people's brain. Like, I remember when we started our kids, both my mom, my mother-in-law, like, so you'll start with the rice cereal. I'm like, actually, I think we're starting with the avocado. And they were like, what? We were really like, what is this craziness you guys are doing?
I know, it's true. And, and I hate to, I don't want to give the impression that rice is bad. It's not a bad food. And it's in fact a cornerstone and a staple in so many different cultures. And there are ways to cook rice in such a way that the arsenic content is lowered. And so if there's a family that's listening that enjoys rice, like that's okay. That's not a bad thing.
So what is that way? Because my daughter loves rice. So I'm curious, what is the way to reduce it, the arsenic content?
Yes, absolutely. So, there have been some really interesting studies that were sort of examining that very question. And what they found, there was a 2015 study, and actually I have an evidence-based recipe on my website that
we'll link
lays
to that.
it all out. Yeah, it's at malinamalkani.com. But they were looking at when you cook rice with different ratios of water to rice, the more water that's used to cook the rice, the more arsenic is removed. And that was the case with both white and brown rice. And when it's a large ratio, when a 12-to-1 ratio of water to rice is used to cook the rice, 50 to 70% of the arsenic can be removed from the rice, according to this.
I'm going to have to look at that. So do you just cook it for a really long time? I mean, it takes a while.
Well, the water's going to take a long time to heat up. Yeah, and then you just pour off the extra. But, interestingly, one of the other methods that they used to cook the rice that they were examining was using a coffee percolator. Cooking rice in a coffee percolator. Yeah, and it actually was quite effective as well. So if you have a coffee percolator at your disposal.
Can't say I do. I'll just be getting a big old pot from my rice now. Okay.
Yeah.
But this is helpful to know because it's one of my daughter's favorite. I feel so badly. She loves rice with soy sauce. And I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, the rest of us are eating sushi and she's just having rice and soy sauce.
The rice. Well, it's a great food. And so it is, I certainly don't want to give the impression that it's a bad food. I don't think it's the best food, to start, to offer first for babies. For babies who are at higher risk for food allergies, whose allergists have recommended early introduction of top allergenic foods like peanut and egg between 4 and 6 months of age. Rice cereal it can be a vehicle into which you mix those foods to offer it in a spoon-fed way to a baby who's not quite ready yet to self-feed. So there are certainly applications for it, but I think that there are definitely alternatives that are better in a lot of ways.
So maybe we have, I'm confident we probably do have some new parents that they're around that age, their baby's starting to show some readiness signs, which we can talk to about in a moment. But what would be some foods that are really good beginning for first baby foods?
Yeah, well, so if you have a baby who is starting at about 6 months of age and is showing all the signs of readiness for solid foods, you can certainly start with finger foods. And I think starting with finger foods is a great baby-led approach that has a lot of benefits, a lot of potential benefits. Avocado, you mentioned, is a great one. It is a natural, ripe avocado is a natural, excellent texture.
And it's delicious.
And it's delicious. And it has those great healthy fats, which are so important for their brain development. It has some omega-3s. It has a lot of fiber. Like, it's just, talk about nutrient rich. An avocado is just bursting with some of those really important nutrients. Banana's another favorite. Again, that texture for self-feeding is just, it's like made for a baby's little gums to mash down. But broccoli is great too. A very soft, steamed stick of broccoli. It has a natural handle that a baby can hold and self-feed, kind of munch on. Interestingly, I started one of my daughters on pureed ground lamb. And that's a very, very... And
that's your Greek background coming out, right?
Totally. You know me so well. I love it. It's a very iron-rich food, and it is important once babies hit about 6 months of age, that they start to get good iron-rich foods. That they start being offered good iron-rich foods at about 6 months of age.
Feel like I hadn't thought of that when my kids were little about the iron-rich foods. Is it just maybe I was clueless, which is very possible, or is this something that people are now a little bit more aware of?
Well, it's something that we've known about for a while, the importance of iron. In utero, in those last few months of being in mommy's tummy, the baby does lay down a lot of great iron stores and store up a lot of iron that gets them through that first 6 months or so of life. But starting around between 4 and 6 months, they do start to need to get iron from food sources. And iron is a really important nutrient. It's actually a heavy metal, which is funny. So we're talking about heavy metals, but it's a heavy metal that's essential for brain development and for the development of the immune system, for overall growth. And it's the part of that red blood cell that helps bring oxygen all around the body. So it has a lot of really important roles. But there's lots of ways to get great, lots of ways to offer iron-rich foods to babies, even starting at about 6 months of age, some of which are a little surprising, I think.
Yeah. Can you go into that? I'm actually quite interested in that. So you mentioned lamb.
Yeah. So if you are starting with purees, which is a perfectly valid way to go as well, pureeing meats it's a great first food. In any meats, it could be beef. That's a great, very bioavailable iron source. Poultry is a great iron-rich food. Fish, eggs, nuts, and seeds. But obviously, we have to change the texture. We can't offer whole nuts or globs of nut butters. We would need to modify those foods to make them infant safe. But beans and legumes are very iron-rich. And so in my book, Simple and Safe Baby-Led Weaning, I go into some ways to modify these foods to make them appropriately sized and textured for babies once they do start eating.
I think that's so great. I'm so glad you brought that to my attention because I really had not thought of that. And it's interesting. I think our bodies also tell us what we need. And I remember at the end of both pregnancies, I was craving, and I don't really even eat this much, chopped liver. I don't know. That's my Jewish background coming out. I wanted the chopped liver and I couldn't get enough of it. And anchovies. I remember my husband came home one time and I was standing in front of an open fridge with a small container of anchovies, just chowing it down. Is that higher in iron too?
It is, and it also it's a great source of omega-3s, which are really important.
And it's salty. It's so
yes.
Oh, I still love anchovies. Oh, I wonder if that was my body being like, you need this, your baby needs this.
I bet. I think there's something very real to that. I really do.
So let's talk about, we talked about babies' first foods, but what are some of the signs that baby's ready for first foods?
Yeah, absolutely. So when a baby can sit upright, with some minimal assistance, and people sometimes get a little confused about, what that means. I mean, minimal assistance, the baby doesn't need to be able to sit upright for hours and hours without any sort of support anywhere. But if the baby can sit up, what we want is for them to be able to sit at a 90-degree angle to the seat, for their hips and knees to be at 90-degree angles. And minimal assistance can include, a couple rolled up dishcloths, maybe on each side of the hips to keep them from sort of slumping, or maybe a little pillow at the back. But we don't want baby to be leaning back in the high chair to start solids, because then gravity is working against you in terms of where the food is falling in the mouth.
That's so interesting because I've seen some high chairs and maybe it's because they just want baby in the kitchen until it's old enough to sit up, but that actually recline pretty far back.
Yes. Yes, and I'm so glad you brought that up because you've mentioned a few times how the recommendations and the information about infant feeding have changed so much over the past, I mean, even 5, 10 years. And you're absolutely right about that. There have been such enormous gains in both evidence-based research with regard to infant feeding, but just also information and thoughtfulness with the design of different feeding tools. And the high chairs are no exception to that. There are high chairs that are really incredible on the market right now, which just facilitate self-feeding and infant feeding that is safer. And so I think it's important to do our homework before buying one, because I think if you think about a high chair, how many times do you use a high chair?
Oh my gosh. We actually just finally a couple years ago got rid of it because ours went, the one we invested in our high chair, it went from high chair and then you could drop it to just bring it against, it was a beautiful wooden one. I think it was a Stokey one against the table. And then you could drop it even further to be just a chair, like a kid's chair.
Yes, and that is so smart. It grows with the child, and it's built in such a way that it's supporting them in all the different stages of growth. And so I just think that was very smart. Well done.
Thank you. But when we think about this, like if you think about even cribs, at one point they had the idea of like the drop down front. I don't remember what that's called, like the drop down bar. And now it's like, absolutely not. So we should think about, if one's in the position of not having maybe a hand-me-down high chair, examining what the current feeding recommendations are, that babies should be upright.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. So that's really important. And the other piece of the other sign of readiness, or another sign of readiness, is that baby can hold the head and the neck still when seated upright. So again, we don't want them leaning back and resting the head on the back of the chair. We want them to be able to hold that head upright, and not without too much bobbling around.
Is another sign that they're trying to reach for your food?
Well, yes. I mean, there's two signs of readiness in there. One is that you want a baby to be able to grasp larger objects and bring them up to the mouth. And then, yes, showing an interest in food is a sign of readiness. And that can sort of look different from baby to baby. You have some that are very reserved and just sort of watch and maybe track your fork as it's going from your plate to your mouth, but some are like downright lunging across the table of your food. So
that is funny. So are there any foods that should be avoided when starting?
Yes. Oh, but you know what? Before I go to that,
Yes.
One other sign of readiness is that the tongue thrust reflex has disappeared. And that's that reflex where if you touch a baby's tongue, or if you bring a spoon to the mouth and place it in the mouth, if the tongue thrusts the spoon out, that reflex has not disappeared yet. And
interesting.
Yeah.
That sounds like an important one, because then if you're putting food in it and it doesn't have, it's then the kind of shoving the food out. Exactly.
Yep. Super important. But another great question of yours about the foods to avoid during the first year. It's funny. There aren't many. And I like that, especially about a baby-led approach where babies are eating finger foods from the family table. As long as they, with some very minor modifications, they can eat most things that we eat as adults. And that makes our jobs so much easier because we're not, cooking 2 different meals. It's just one meal for the whole family. But there are foods. It's a great question, because honey is something that should be avoided throughout the first year of life. And that's to reduce the risk of infant botulism, which is very rare. But something's definitely to avoid.
Even if it's cooked?
Yep. Even if it's cooked, baked.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah. So even breads or anything with an ingredient that lists, if honey is listed as an ingredient, it's best to avoid it. Honey graham crackers, anything with honey. Unpasteurized cheeses, milks, juices, anything unpasteurized. We want to reduce that risk of foodborne illness in an infant with a still developing immune system. So that would be something to avoid.
What about if someone has a juicer and they're making it themselves?
Well, what I would say is a couple things. First, that juice is not recommended for babies anyway.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah.
I missed that part. Yeah.
For a bunch of different reasons. Yeah. But that would be a risk. Yeah.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah, because we don't want to replace any of that essential breast milk and or formula, which is that number one source of nutrients throughout the first year of life.
All right. So those are good. So in the past, I felt like people were like, oh, wait until try peanut butter. But now it seems like there's actually a push to bring some of those allergen prone foods a little earlier. Am I correct about that?
Totally. And I'm so glad you said that, because as we're going through it, it's like, well, this, but not that, and this, but not that. But we used to think this, and now we think that. And so it's confusing. It's got to be hard for parents, especially also for caregivers, maybe someone who raised a baby 10, 15 years ago when everything was completely different. It can be really difficult to navigate the changes.
About to stand up on the information.
Yeah,
That
right.
is hard. All right. We're going to take another break and we come back. Now, you are the mother of 3 girls, so you've been through parenthood for a bit. If you have one tip or piece of advice, and it can be about anything, what would you like to offer new and expectant parents? We'll be right back.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
All right. So it can be anything. It can be from your background as a dietitian. It can be from you are a well-seasoned mother. What would you like to offer?
Oh, that's a great question. I would just say, as much as we can trust in our babies and our children's innate ability to meet their nutrient needs and self-regulate their own intake, as much as we can trust them to do that, it benefits them in the long term. As a dietitian and as a mom, I'm always trying to take the long view of nutrition and help parents raise kids who have a really healthy and positive relationship with food that carries them throughout their lives. And babies in particular, they're born with this really amazing ability to eat when they're hungry and stop when they're full, when we offer them a variety of healthy foods throughout the day. And I get so many concerned messages and questions from parents and from clients and patients who want to know, but how much should they be eating? Like, how many tablespoons, and what's the portion size that they should be eating? And there's no easy answer to that, because it depends on so many different things. It depends on their activity level and their size and their, what they ate earlier in the day, what they ate earlier in the week. Appetites fluctuate. And the more that we can build that internal ability to eat when hungry and stop when full, the better off we are in the long term.
That is so important. I'm going to take that to heart even with my kids now, because there's times that they're heading off to school. I'm like, are you sure you don't want another egg? Like, I'm like chasing them out the door. Do you want to squeeze a yogurt? Like,
totally. I do it too. We're programmed, I think, as parents and caregivers, and especially as mothers, to nourish. We want to nourish them. And we think we know what they need better than they do. And
that's not true. And then it's and then it's showing that, oh, maybe my mom knows something, I shouldn't trust myself. So we can go down a whole rabbit hole about them finding self-confidence and self-reliance by us chasing them food down their mouth.
Totally. I'm so glad you mentioned that. And it's not to say that we just turn away and just sort of let them, be completely on their own with regard to food. We want to watch those larger trends rather than counting bites, like you said, in tablespoons of food. But but looking at the larger trends, like the growth curve. Is the baby or the child following their percentile and their growth curve? Are they filling diapers? Are they more or less happy and seemingly satisfied after meals? These are the larger trends to watch rather than getting caught up in that day to day.
Oh, that is so important because I have seen that. I've seen all sorts of records that people keep of how many ounces and how many tablespoons. And I like that you're giving the permission to not have to worry about that. Because again, as we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, there's already so much to worry about. Let's try to take stuff off our plates.
Totally. I could not agree more.
So where can people find your work?
Yes. Well, I am so excited to be launching my very first online course on infant feeding. And it's an easy play. You can find it really easily at babyledfeedingcourse.com. And that's going to be launching in July. Early bird pricing is available now, but it's launching in July. It's based on my book, Simple and Safe Baby-Led Feeding, but it kind of takes the book and brings it up off the page into life with real life examples and lots of images and guidance. So I'm really excited about that. My website, malinamalkani.com, has lots of free resources, lots of articles and recipes and things to help guide you on your feeding journey. And my Instagram is at healthy.mom.healthy.kids. And I post daily there about pediatric and maternal nutrition and my motherhood journey. And I'm always happy to connect with people there.
Oh, this is such great information. I am so glad we got to connect. I just love talking with you. I love that your brain is so wrapped up in this and that you're just giving this information to people because it's necessary. Things change and you're really up on the data, which I appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is so my pleasure to join you here. And we have such a rich history, you and I.
Oh, people only know. If people,
I know.
I'm thinking back to boyfriends and sleepovers in that teeny room. Okay, listeners, if you stay to the end, you just have to listen to one small story. I don't know if Malina still remembers this.
Oh,
do you remember the dishwasher?
Oh.
All right. So friends, if listeners are still here,
you're killing me.
So I think this was maybe one of our first or second nights in this house. I think there may be a couple other, again, we were 19 or 20. And I will admit I was just in dorms before then. I didn't do a lot of dishes and I think it was really our first or second night and we were running the dishwasher and I didn't know for whatever reason. And clearly Malina didn't know. Am I embarrassing you with this? I can always cut it.
I am remembering this.
You remember this?
It was such a Brady Bunch moment.
We poured the liquid dish soap in the dishwasher. And then I think it must have been the first night and then went off for like our company meeting. Everyone's meeting each other and like, hi, performer. It was wonderful. And we come back and the kitchen is filled with suds all over the floor. Do you remember this?
It was like the suds took over the house. I will never forget that. I will never forget that.
They had to call some of the stagehands and get a wet vac. So
I can't believe you brought that up. Oh my goodness.
I'm here to embarrass us. I still remember it. I still have that flash in my mind.
Oh, that was hysterical. And you know what? That kicked off a summer of so many more moments like that between us.
Which some of them we'll just keep to ourselves.
Totally.
That was such a good time. I just love chatting with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I wish you all the best, and I cannot wait to collaborate with you again.
Yay.
This has been an episode of Yoga Birth Babies, produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. You can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Periscope. I'm Deb Flaschenberg. Thanks for listening.
Spin your passion into a business with Shopify and break sales records with the world's best converting checkout. Let's hear that one more time. The world's best converting checkout. Shopify's legendary checkout makes it easier for customers to shop on your website, across social media, and everywhere in between. Now that's music to your ears. Any way you spin it, you can be a smash hit with Shopify. Start your $1 a month trial today at shopify.com/records.